9 days ago, the largest open AI model on Earth was something you could only rent. On Sunday, Moonshot AI put all 2.8 trillion parameters of Kimi K3 on the internet for free, a full day early. Within hours, the download thread was one of the biggest AI stories Hacker News has run all year. And then developers did two very unromantic things. They read the license, and they added up the hardware. This deep dive is not about benchmarks. It is about the money. What free actually costs, who can physically afford to run it, and why the company that gave the thing away may still end up collecting. First, what actually shipped and when. Moonshot had publicly committed to July 27th. The weights went live on Hugging Face on the evening of July 26th, U.S. Eastern Time, roughly a day early, at the repository Moonshotai/Kimi-K3. They are gated, meaning you accept the license terms before the download starts. And the download is not small. The 4-bit build runs to hundreds of gigabytes on disk, and one of the first things people asked in the comments was whether Hugging Face could even survive the bandwidth. Alongside the weights, Moonshot published a technical report, the first time the architecture had been documented in public rather than described in a launch post. Here is what the model card confirms, in Moonshot's own numbers. 2.8 trillion total parameters, with about 104 billion activated per token. 896 experts, 16 of which fire on any given token. A context window of 1,048,576 tokens. Native vision input. And critically for everything that follows, the weights ship in MXFP4, 4-bit precision, with MXFP8 activations, trained that way from the start rather than compressed afterwards. That last detail is not a footnote. It is the difference between a model that needs several terabytes of memory and one that needs roughly 1.5. The scale of the reaction is worth a number, because attention is the one currency an open release definitely earns. The Hugging Face listing hit over 1,100 points and more than 400 comments on Hacker News. The technical report thread pulled another 320-plus points on its own. Within the same day, the model appeared in Alma's library. The VLLM project published a serving guide, and at least 4 commercial inference providers announced they were live. That is the OpenWeights flywheel working exactly as designed. You publish the file, and the entire industry spends its own money making your model faster. Now the document almost nobody reads. Moonshot did not ship K3 under Apache or plain MIT. It shipped its own terms, called simply the Kimi K3 license. The clause that matters most is aimed at one specific business, model as a service, meaning anyone who resells inference or fine-tuning access to third parties. If you run that business, and the combined revenue of your company and its affiliates passes $20 million over any consecutive 12-month period, you must negotiate a separate commercial agreement with Moonshot before continuing. Not a courtesy notification, a separate deal. There is a second clause that is even more revealing about intent. Any commercial product or service built on K3 that passes 100 million monthly active users or $20 million in monthly revenue must display the words Kimi K3 prominently in its user interface. Read that again. At the scale where a model becomes invisible infrastructure, Moonshot has written itself a permanent billboard. And the exemptions are just as telling. Internal use is fine, and so is access through Moonshot's own products or its certified inference partners. Free, unless you get big. And even then, cheaper if you route through channels Moonshot has blessed. So is this open source? Under the strict definition, no, and it is worth being precise about why. The open source initiative's AI definition requires the training code and enough detail about the training data for someone else to reconstruct the system. Moonshot has released neither for K3 or for any previous Kimi model, and the license itself is not an OSI-approved license. So the accurate phrase is OpenWeights, a file you can download, inspect, fine-tune, and run, but not a system you can audit or rebuild. That distinction has been dismissed as pedantry for 2 years. This release is where it starts having a dollar figure attached. Now the physics, because this is where free stops being free. Even in 4-bit MXFP4, the K3 weights need roughly 1.4 terabytes of fast memory just to sit there before you allocate a single token of context. The VLLM project's own serving guide states the floor plainly. 8 of NVIDIA's newest B300 accelerators in a single node, or a GB300 rack configuration, or 16 B200S. Moonshot's own deployment guidance points at supernodes of 64-plus accelerators. There is no consumer path here. There is no enthusiast with 4 cards path here. The entry ticket is a rack. The VLLM engineering numbers are worth quoting because they show how hard the serving problem is. On 16 GB 300 class GPUs, single-user decoding runs at 118 tokens per second without speculative decoding. Turn on their DSpark speculative decoder, and it jumps to 370, a 3.14 times speedup. On 8 GPUs, the same pair of numbers is 111 and 331. And speculation works better on some jobs than others, about 4.7 accepted tokens per step on coding versus 2.6 on creative writing. Predictable code is cheap to guess ahead. Prose is not. To see what that means commercially, look at how one provider laid it out. Based-in described running K3 on GB300 NVL72 systems, 8 GPUs per instance, 2 nodes per replica, which works out to 9 copies of the model per full rack. They also rebuilt the tokenizer, claiming up to 18 times faster than the standard implementation on long inputs, and worked directly with the VLLM and SGLang teams to get there. That is what serving this model competently requires. A commenter on Hacker News summed up the mood in one line. This is historic. We will not be able to run it ourselves, but many providers can. So the practical meaning of open weights, for almost everyone, is not I can run this. It is somebody else will run this for me, and now there are several of them competing. Fireworks, Together AI, Modal, and Based-in all announced Day Zero hosted access, and the model landed in Alama's library and on OpenRouter the same week. Fireworks was refreshingly blunt about the value proposition in its own launch post, stating that hosting K3 yourself is not practical for most engineering teams. That is a hosting company telling you not to self-host. It is also, as far as the numbers go, simply true. Here is the part that makes this a genuinely new phase rather than a repeat of the launch. When only Moonshot served the model, Moonshot set the price. $3 per million input tokens, 15 per million output, 30 cents on a cache hit. Now that anyone with a rack can serve it, the price becomes a discovery process. We have a precedent for how that goes. Developers tracking GLM 5.2 on OpenRouter reported its price falling roughly 45% in the 6 weeks after release, as new providers kept undercutting each other, and the slide had not obviously stopped. Which raises the question sitting under this entire release. If third-party hosts drive the price of serving K3 toward the cost of the electricity and the rack, what exactly is Moonshot selling? 3 things, based on the license text. Its own first-party API, which stays the default path. Certified partner status, which the license explicitly exempts from the display requirement. And commercial agreements with every reseller that crosses $20 million. Moonshot did not give away its business. It gave away the product and kept the toll booth. Now, does any of this move real budgets? The clearest evidence sits in routing data. On OpenRouter, the marketplace that lets developers switch model providers with one line of config, the share of tokens going to US-built models fell from roughly 70% in June of last year to around 30% by June of this year. Estimates of the Chinese model share of US enterprise traffic vary a lot by how you slice it, from the mid-40s to around 60% in early July, so treat the exact figure with care. The direction, across every version of the measurement, is the same. The reason is arithmetic, and it is not the sticker price. It is cost per finished task. One published comparison on a coding benchmark put a single K3 rollout at $4.65 against $13.41 for Claude Fable 5, with the full sweep coming in at roughly $2,100 versus $6,000. That works out to about 2.8 times more solved tasks per dollar. Fireworks published its own per-task figures in the same spirit, around 52 cents on a software engineering task. Companies including DoorDash and Airbnb have been named in reporting as having moved workloads to Chinese models on exactly this logic. But it is worth airing the counterargument, because it is well made. A widely shared developer analysis titled simply that K3 is not cheap points out that against other Chinese models the picture inverts. K3 costs roughly double GLM 5.2 per task and around 20 times DeepSeek v4, partly because K3 is verbose and thinks at length, so it burns more tokens getting there. The honest framing is that K3 is a bargain compared to American frontier models and expensive compared to the rest of the Chinese open field. It is competing on capability per dollar, not on being the cheapest thing available. And then there is the single most consequential number in this whole story, which is still a report rather than a confirmed fact. Multiple outlets have reported that Microsoft has been evaluating K3 for Copilot and Azure, with potential inference savings of up to $600 million against what it currently pays for OpenAI and Anthropic models. Microsoft has not confirmed the figure or any adoption, and K3 is not in the public Azure catalog. But the very fact that the evaluation is credible tells you what changed. Copilot is being run as a routing platform, not a marriage. To the market, and to be clear, what follows is fact, not investment advice. Monday, July 27th, the first full trading session after the weights went public, was rough for the chipmakers. Using live market data, NVIDIA closed at $197.55, down about 4.5% on the day. AMD closed at $490.27, down roughly 6%. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index finished at 11,506, its weakest close in this entire stretch, and about 9% below where it sat 2 weeks earlier. The more interesting number that same session is the one that went the other way. Microsoft closed at $392.87, up nearly 3%, and Broadcom finished essentially flat. Markets move for many reasons on any given day, and no single release explains a whole session, so do not overread it. But the shape is worth noticing, because it matches the logic of this entire episode. The companies that sell the compute took the hit. The company that buys inference and resells it, and now has one more supplier to play off against the others, did not. Three things to watch. And the first is a live experiment. Over the next few weeks, third-party providers will discover the true floor price of serving a 2.8 trillion parameter model. Nobody has ever had to price this before. Whatever number the market settles on becomes the first public estimate of what frontier-class inference actually costs to produce, and every closed lab's margin gets measured against it. If the GLM precedent holds and prices slide meaningfully in 6 weeks, that is the most useful piece of information to come out of this release. Second, watch the shrinking. The moment weights go public, the community starts compressing and distilling. Several people asked on day one whether K3 could be distilled into a 200 billion or 20 billion parameter version that ordinary hardware can hold, the way other labs have done with their flagships. If that works, the real story of this release will not be the rack-scale model at all. It will be the small models trained on its output, and those are the ones that actually reach laptops. Third, watch enforcement, and watch Beijing and Washington. A $20 million revenue clause is only meaningful if someone crosses it and moonshot acts. Meanwhile, the company is reportedly closing a financing round in the low 30 billions and preparing for a Hong Kong listing, which gives it every reason to demonstrate that its open model produces revenue, and not just goodwill. And the U.S. policy fight over Chinese models has not gone away just because the file is now on everyone's hard drive. Restricting a model is a very different problem once the weights are already downloaded. That is our fourth deep dive on Kimi K3, and the least glamorous one, which is usually a sign you are finally looking at the real mechanism. The largest open model ever built is now free to download, and functionally impossible for almost anyone to run alone. The license is generous right up to the point where you start making money. The hosts are competing to serve it, which will tell us, for the first time in public, what frontier inference actually costs. And the buyers are already routing around the incumbents on cost per task. Giving the model away was not charity. It was distribution strategy, and it is working. If this is the kind of breakdown you want, subscribe, and we will keep following the money. This is AI Daily.